Hello, this is the 56th lecture on Revelation and World History. We have completed chapters 1 through 6 of Revelation and World History. We have completed the first half of the 12-chapter lecture and are now entering the second half. We have covered several crucial topics in the interpretation of the book of Revelation. We have discovered the true identity of the two beasts that appear in Revelation chapter 13, the seven-headed beast. And we have come to know who the beast with two horns like a lamb is, the one corresponding to 666. We also found a community of 144,000 people. We have also historically verified the relationship between Gog and Magog and Babylon. We are now examining another important topic, the Battle of Armageddon. In this lecture, we will explore Mount Megiddo, Valley of Megiddo, and Hill of Megiddo. Revelation and World History, Chapter 7, Section 9. Mount Megiddo, Valley of Megiddo, Hill of Megiddo. Let us examine Zechariah chapter 14. You will flee to the valley of the mountains, just as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah king of Judah. In that day there will be no light, and the bright things will depart. There will be a day known to the Lord, neither day nor night. When it is dark there will be light. Zechariah chapter 14 verses 5 to 7. On June 25, 1950, 3 days after North Korea began the Korean War, the capital city of Seoul fell. The South Korean army pushed back, was defending its final line of defense along the Nakdong River. If Daegu fell into the hands of the North Korean People's Army, Busan would be the only remaining defense. If they could no longer hold out at the Daegu front, they would lose the war and face the fate of the entire Korean peninsula, falling to communism. Beyond Busan, there was only the sea, leaving them with nowhere to escape. Just as when the U.S. military withdrew from Vietnam during the Vietnam War, only a few people will be able to board the boats and become boat people. This could be expressed as the fate of the fatherland was on the brink of a precipice. The fiercest battle fought to defend Daegu was the Battle of Da-bu-dong. This was a necessary passage for any advance from north to south and served as a gateway to Daegu. If they lost this battle, Daegu would fall into the hands of the North Korean People's Army, putting the war in a desperate situation. When it gets dark, there will be a ray of light. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 7. As soon as the war broke out, they were pushed south without time to defend themselves, surrendering their capital, Seoul, to the North Korean People's Army in just 3 days. Back to the Nakdong River front, they were in danger of losing the war, without the help of US and UN forces. The entire Korean peninsula was in a situation where it had no choice but to fall into the hands of the communist forces. If this last line of defense collapses, South Korea's fate will be in grave danger. The most intense battle of the Nakdong River defense line operation was the Battle of Da-bu-dong. This battle involved a full-scale offensive by 4 North Korean divisions, from August 3 to September 22, 1950. We referred to Kim Sung-woo's History of the Korean War. On September 15, 1950, the Incheon landing operation, led by General MacArthur, was successful. This operation cut off the North Korean Army's supply lines, halting their advance and forcing them to retreat. As a result, Seoul was recaptured. Furthermore, it enabled South Korean and UN forces, who had been on the defensive, to launch a counterattack. At a time when the nation's fate was dwindling, a light was once again shining. After the war, all churches in North Korea were destroyed. If the North Korean army had won, and the Korean peninsula had become communist, The terrible result would have been the extermination of Christians on the Korean peninsula. In a fate like a candle in the wind, the church in South Korea survived. The number of believers in South Korean churches gradually increased, reaching 10 million. The word Armageddon translates to Mount Megiddo, or Hill of Megiddo. In the book of Zechariah, it is referred to as the Valley of Megiddo, Zechariah chapter 12 verse 11. The city defended during the Battle of Dabu-dong during the Korean War was Daegu. Literally, it means great hill. The city was named after its basin surrounded by mountains. The Battle of Dabu-dong was also fought on a great hill. The place name of Busan, where the Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea was located during the Korean War, also ends with mountain. See lecture in Chapter 5, Section 4. However, interpreting the entire book of prophecy, this war does not refer to a specific city or region, like Daegu or Busan. This clearly refers to the entire Korean peninsula. The Korean War was a war fought across the Korean peninsula, which the world's great powers had used as a passage valley. It was precisely the same as the Battle of Armageddon described in the Bible, a war in which the whole world gathered to attack one nation. The Battle of Armageddon is closely related to Babylon, mentioned in the book of Revelation. Babylon is the Soviet Union. The Korean War was waged by Kim Il-sung, who was promoted by Stalin. After World War II, the world was divided into the free world and the communist world. The United Nations, a global organization established after World War II, supported South Korea. And the Communist bloc supported North Korea. As a result, the entire world gathered on the Korean peninsula, attacking it and devastating the entire nation. It is also the only war fought by a global coalition, authorized by the United Nations, a global coalition organization. The U.S.-Afghan War, which broke out in 2001, was a war waged by the U.S. military and the NATO coalition. This was a case where the UN recognized the right of self-defense of an attacked nation. The Iraq War, which began in 2003, was unilaterally waged by the US and the UK, without UN approval. It would not be wrong to say that the Korean War was the only instance in which UN forces were recruited from all over the world, and every continent in the name of the UN, and directly fought a war. This is distinct from the UN peacekeeping forces deployed to conflict zones. Then, the Lord will fight, as he did in the day of battle. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 3. This was not a symbolic war, but a real war that could be recorded as the most horrific in human history. The city will be taken, the houses plundered, the women ravaged, and half the people will go into exile. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 2. The entire Korean peninsula was reduced to ashes by war. And the northern half of the Korean peninsula remains under North Korean communist rule to this day. Thus says the Lord, in all the land, 2/3 will perish, but 1/3 will be left. I will bring that 1/3 through the fire, I will refine it as silver is refined, and test it as gold is tested. Zechariah chapter 13 verses 8 to 9. Even amidst the oppression of the Japanese colonial period, the Korean church maintained its faith. Churches in North Korea flourished, so much so that it is said, at the time of liberation, 2/3 of the Korean church was in North Korea. However, the North Korean church was completely destroyed by the Kim Il-sung dictatorship. We referred to Kim Hung-soo's History of the North Korean Church after Liberation. Fortunately, the Korean church was preserved, thanks to South Korean believers who survived the war, and North Korean believers who fled. After that, the church grew day by day, and the number of believers reached close to 10 million. Furthermore, it became the country that sent the second largest number of missionaries overseas after the United States. On that day, living water will flow out from Jerusalem, half to the East Sea and half to the West Sea, in summer and in winter. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 8. This passage clearly describes the geographical characteristics of the historical site, where the prophecy was fulfilled. See lecture in chapter 5. This is the same description as the land divided by rivers, in Isaiah chapter 18 verse 2. The spring water that originated from the peak of Bekdu mountain became the source of the river. Half of it became the Tumen River, which flows into the East Sea. And half became the Yalu River, which flows into the West Sea. All of these events recorded in the prophecy unfolded on the Korean Peninsula, where these two rivers form the border. Everett Carver states, it is physically impossible for water to flow in two directions from its source. We refer to Everett Carver's Encyclopedia of End Times. However, the Yalu and Duman rivers clearly originate from the same place, the Bekdu Mountain Chunji Pond. Including the Songhwa River flowing north, there are 3 rivers originating from the same place. But theologians were unaware of that fact. A country divided by rivers or a country with river-bound borders is the Korean Peninsula. The Korean Peninsula is a country where 70% of its territory is mountainous. In other words, the war that took place on the Megiddo Hill was the Korean War. The word Armageddon appears in Revelation chapter 16 verse 16. The word Armageddon refers to Mount Megiddo, or the Hill of Megiddo. Zechariah chapter 12 verse 11 describes the mourning in the valley of Megiddo. This passage describes a war in which a coalition of nations from around the world attacks a single nation, Israel. Therefore, looking for a war in which a world coalition attacks a country is a shortcut to getting closer to the reality of the War of Armageddon. It is the Korean War. In the next lecture, we will explore Chapter 8, Section 1, The Dictator Who Terrified the World. It was the Bible History School. If you subscribe and set up notifications, you can continue listening to the lectures on Revelation and world history.